So we have a couple roving mics. Just raise your hand, and Eric or Rodrigo will bring the microphone to you. So, oh yes. Before we get started, one of the sponsors of the meeting is the Center for Invasive Species Research at UC Riverside. Mark Cottle is the director, and the website is cisr.ucr.edu. And Mark has put together a little website on this pest, and a summary of this meeting also will be posted at some point here in the near future, but you can see that there's several photographs that you can also easily access to if you have any questions about this pest.
Could you repeat that?
cisr.ucr.edu. You're welcome.
All those photographs are high resolution, so if you need them for outreach or newspaper articles or whatever, you can right-click them off the website and take them and they're publication ready.
So with that, do we have any questions for our panel? One back there, Ed?
I have a question for Don. You've seen this beetle now for a number of years, spreading in different areas in LA County. Could you characterize or estimate how fast it's spreading and what you would expect to see over the next few years?
Thank you, Ed. I probably don't have as much experience tracking the movement of this beetle as Keith or Richard, but I would, from the map that Keith put up there, it's moved from, say, Long Beach up to San Marino to Arcadia to Rowland Heights within about 5 or 6 years. And I suspect that it was actually around before it was even trapped or otherwise recognized. So. Yes, the first sighting I saw was in Long Beach, and that sighting had the box elders or Acer negundos dying in spectacular fashion. And that was 2010.
I have a question for Zivi. Maybe Zivi can tell us how fast this is moving in Israel.
Well, we don't have very good numbers about that, but it seems to move about, I would say, at least 20 kilometers a year, at least. So the beetle don't fly long distances. That's we know from information coming from Sri Lanka. In Sri Lanka, they did some very extensive research about that. So we believe that the beetle are not so different. And by the way, the beetle does not live long without food. They not survive more than 48 hours without food. So we assume that the beetle themselves cannot spread long distances. However, many times we don't see the first infestations, and as it was said more than once here, people tend to move the beetle as well. But of course, we shouldn't forget the effect of the wind. Beetles are small, they fly very high, they may be carried by wind as well. So it will be very difficult to estimate the flight distance of the beetle. So what I would say that in area with enough suitable host, 20 kilometer, at the range of 20 kilometers per year is more or less the figure.
Okay, for you who don't think in metric, 20 kilometers is roughly 12 miles. Any other questions?
Do we know enough about how it's vectored to put a risk value on its presence at Huntington that has hundreds of thousands of visitors a year from all over the world?
No.
I think we do need to clarify something. When Akif showed the map with these two really dark areas there in Los Angeles, where the Huntington and the LA Arboretum were, the reason we find so many infested trees there is because we've been going there all the time, because there they've got trees with names on it, and we can easily identify them. So these spots there do not indicate that that area is any more heavily infested than other areas. If you look around San Marino, it's quite heavily infested as well. So we do not want to leave you here with the impression that the Huntington and the LA Arboretum are sort of the source of a lot of this misery. It's not at all the case. They happen to be unfortunate to be placed in a place where there's lots of these beetles around.
I just was pointing out that the Arboretum and Huntington are unique in that their number of visitors and their potential for dispersion over real long distances in short periods of time. And that was what I was curious about, the potential impacts of that.
Yeah, it's true. If you, if you walk around there or anywhere in that area, you have a certain chance that indeed, particularly if you're sitting next to a box elder, you will most likely at some point in the day, in the afternoon in particular, get a beetle on you. So.
I have a question for homeowners who are purchasing firewood. What do we do if we see galleries or some kind of infestation in the wood that we have delivered to our homes? Is there anyone we can call, or is that a solarization thing that everybody has to be aware of? Or
I would think as a homeowner, if you find something that you suspect, you contact your county entomologist or your pest advisor just to let somebody know. Typically with us, I know we do a lot of work from private landowners through pictures, anything like that, but county entomologist, pest control advisor.
Hi. At this point, it's a coast liable considered a highly susceptible host plants? Thank you.
Yes, coast liveoak is one of the highly susceptible oak, I would say. So we start using the term reproductive host, which means beetle get into the host and inbreed in that host, and then produce a lot of next generation and then spread. So coast liveoak is one of them, and box elder is another one. It's the most common one. Avocado is another one. Castor bean is the another one that I will count right now.
Can't we conclude that the Huntington Gardens has actually been infested much longer? The beetles have been exploiting just about all the food sources there. Ruben was telling me that there was an English oak that had to be cut down. It was so badly infested. Well, that's from one part of the world. Then there's castor bean from, I don't know where castor bean is native to, but Africa. This beetle shows amazing, being omnivorous, just about anything. Not particularly to breed, but definitely to food source.
Well, first, I'd like to make a difference with you, Keith and Richard, that there's only 4 or 5 true hosts. You have not really surveyed for the beetle itself long enough to be able to tell that. You've just been looking strictly for the fungal symptoms, and therefore, I think there are many, many more than you are willing to admit.
We're very careful, Ruben, as you know, and you know that's. You got to be careful sometimes. So we're only saying the ones we really know, and time will tell if other ones are also hosts. And for instance, Don Hodel said that trees like the platanus, the sycamore, you know, we see a lot of infestation holes in those things, and we've put some of our little, you know, band-aids on there, and we don't see any beetle activity in there. And he showed that these trees were still standing in Long Beach years after the infestation when it looked really bad. So it's very well possible that, you know, the sycamore is not a host. And what we are trying to do now is to team up with cities that are taking trees down, and where we can then, with a chainsaw, dissect the tree and see indeed if beetle reproduction takes place. But the ones that we've mentioned, we are sure that they do form a reproductive host. We suspect a whole bunch of other ones, but we don't know.
Okay, well, that's what you needed to have said in your presentation. That's not what you said.
So far.
A question here?
Yes, I have a question regarding the safe movement of mulch. Mulch is, you know, in landscapes. I order it by the truckload. What do I do regarding truckloads that are moved from LA County to San Bernardino County? Do you simply reject or ask that it not contain sycamore, it not contain oak, it not contain box elder, or do you just offhand say you can't accept it?
You can say that, but there's nothing to prevent them from moving it. I mean, that's the thing, with getting the mulch or any of that kind of chipping material, I think the risk associated with moving the beetle in that is very limited. I would think that that's probably one of the best ways to actually move the material. Some of the work that they've done is, you know, they'll bury it. I mean, you can combine some of these treatments. You can tarp some of the mulch in case there's a concern. But I would think that that's not really a big concern. I'm like,
Maybe is Jason Smith in the audience? Jason, maybe you could make a comment based on Florida research.
Yeah, so we did studies 2 years in a row on the red ambrosia beetle survival after chipping, and we found that we had a couple emerge, but we're talking about from 12 cubic meters of red bay wood, which is a ton. I mean, it's a lot, not literally a ton, it's more than that. But anyway, it's a lot of wood, and very few beetles survived. I mean, so we couldn't say that it was zero possibility, but I think Tom's right. I think the chances of very many coming out is very, very low. And the pathogen, by the way, didn't survive very long either, because as soon as that wood is chipped, it's a completely different environment. There's other microbes that just start growing on it almost immediately. It changes its moisture and temperature. So I think chipping is really a good, very good, avenue to take.
Can I think one of the things that probably would really help you in being a bit more sure about that there's no beetles in there is to ask them for old mulch, stuff that has been laying around for a while. Yeah, or composted stuff. Composted stuff, I don't believe anything will survive in.
I have two questions. Getting back to the hosts, is there going to be a list produced of the ones that you know for sure are known hosts, potential ones that the beetles have sampled that they don't like? Are we going to start seeing some of the? I know this is still in its infancy, but are we going to start seeing some of those lists?
Yes, we are still working on it, but we can just come up with the short list, which is that we found the very true host. We will come up. Yeah.
And will that be posted on one of the websites?
Yes, we can post in one of our websites.
And my second question is, do you have any idea how this got in? Just from listening and watching and seeing it sounds like one of the ports, either through the port or through the airport.
That's a very good question.
Cargo, of some sort.
Good question. I don't know how did it come to here, but there's a point that I just want to make. From now on, it doesn't matter. It is here. So So we need to deal with it, and then we need to find out how we are going to deal with this.
But in that regard, I've heard, I don't know if Gavork is here, but I've heard him speak to this, and I've seen this published. Going back to the medfly, for instance, that was shown to be repeated infestations, repeated introductions. Not that the pest was established here, it was repeated introductions, mainly through the airport. So if we can determine how this came in, was it in wood packing material or crates or something, then maybe the cargo inspectors at the port and at the airport could be more diligent about looking for this particular insect if we know that that was a known route of entry.
That's a very good point.
I think the major problem we have with this is that we don't know where its area of origin is. So I think in the port they have enough personnel to inspect 2% of the containers. So we don't know where it's from, and they have very few personnel. Forget about it.
Sure, Mark.
I mean, if it's known that it's in Israel, and we have we're receiving cargo from other areas of known infestation.
Yeah. Well, we've looked at a couple of beetles from Israel and their DNA. And so far, we have 2 different variants of that beetle, and they've only one. So if there's been transport between the 2 of us, we would be the most likely source of their stuff.
I'd like to make one comment to address your issue. I think this is an important take-home message from this type of meeting. What we are dealing with here is a symptom of a much greater problem that California is dealing with. This is just one invasive species that's on the radar right now. Up until 1989, California was acquiring exotic species at a rate of 6 per year. I've just finished another analysis with the California Department of Food and Agriculture that goes from 1989 to 2010. We are now acquiring exotic species at established breeding populations in California at a rate of 10 per year now. So this is a symptom of too much trade that's not regulated well enough, too many tourists coming through the airport and the baggage not being inspected. So for example, Los Angeles Airport gets 65 million passengers passing through that place a year. Everybody has at least 2 suitcases with them, and I'd say less than 1% of that stuff gets inspected, and we know people are smuggling stuff in their suitcases all the time. So unless something changes, this is a perpetual problem that we're going to have to deal with, and likely those numbers are going to increase from 10 per year, maybe up to 15. That's what we see in Hawaii and Florida now. Those are the rates at which they're acquiring exotic species.
Hi, I'm Susan Sims. If I understand you right, and the beetle can only survive 48 hours without food, and it must feed on the fungus, can we not narrow the area of concern by just looking at those trees that we know can support the fungus? And can we inoculate trees that we're maybe concerned with to see if they can support the fungus? And then instead of being so concerned about 250 species of trees in Southern California?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The beetle is depend on the fungus, but if you mean if the fungus is around, it is not going to find a new host. Is that what your question?
The question is, if it can only survive 48 hours without feeding, then infesting other trees that cannot support this fungus is not going to support the beetle. It won't have time to support, to have to reproduce. Right. So wouldn't we be able to narrow the field of what we're concerned about?
Well, that's one of the things. So in order to monitor this problem, we need to monitor the first the primary host around the infestation area to find out if beetle is growing or not. So I don't know if the beetle is not going to survive after 48 hours. I don't know about that time, but so I don't know. I don't have any answer for that. Ruben has a comment on that.
Uh-oh.
Ruben.
Just let's get this question here first.
Yeah, I was interested, is there any reason to think that the trees in natural settings would be less susceptible to the trees in urban settings? So speaking primarily about the coast live oaks, to this
Very good
species.
question.
It's a really good question, one we don't have a good answer for. Data from other parts of the world would suggest that trees that are overwatered are going to be more susceptible to this complex than trees that are receiving an appropriate amount of water. Now, how you take that piece of information and put it into a natural landscape, that's the real trick. But in areas, in riparian areas and others where the trees are growing and very healthy, my guess is that they're going to be more resistant than in places where they're being stressed, in particular overwatered. So just because they're growing, and I have to put a big caveat, just because they're growing in natural settings doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be immune either. So I think that there are some species that are going to be at higher risk than others, and unfortunately coast live oak is one of those that has been identified as a reproductive host.
So Tim and Richard and Akif will be kind of looking more in the urban areas, and I'll be doing the same out on the national forest, kind of looking at the impact once we find it in those areas. But that's the thing, we just haven't seen it on public land yet.
So I think we'll end with a question from Ruben, and then we'll move on to Mark.
I'd like to make a comment to the lady about the beetle and the food. It carries its own food with it. It just as soon as it starts boring, it doesn't take many hours before the food becomes available to it, correct, Akif?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct, but I think she was asking about the suitable host for the fungus and beetle.
I don't understand, but it's okay.
So I think we have time for one more question. Is there one more question out there? Mary Lou.
Well, I guess mine's not really a question, mine's a comment, and that's why I waited to the end. Many of you know who I am, and I work for the Citrus Research Board, and I've been heavily involved in the fight against Asian citrus. That was well timed. Oh, I'll just face the audience. And my point is, or what I want to say, I think this group and the people involved in this PATHA system probably should look at what the citrus industry has done with that particular fight. We were fortunate in that we started our education, communication education program long before California even had the psyllid, let alone the disease. Another thing that is very important, you're going to need a lot of industry support. I don't care if you're a landscaper, avocado grower, nursery, it's going to take all of you. There's issues of funding. You're going to need your avocado commission. If walnuts or olives or grapes are found to be hosts, it's going to take them. It's citrus. Also, Florida has a similar problem, even though they're different species, but you might want to think about pairing as far as getting national funding from the federal government. With citrus, it took the citrus industry in Florida, Texas, Arizona, even Louisiana to get the funding that we have. And it took several years to get the funding levels that we have. There's a huge USDA process. We started off with technical working groups, TWIGs, research working groups. For the federal government, you kind of have to go through some of these processes in order to establish the threat, the impact of the threat, the level of the threat, how many people are affected, how many business, the economic effects. And so you need to start doing that now. One of the biggest lessons that I learned in graduate school was from a couple of guys from UC Davis. And they taught us that as plant pathologists, which I am, you address a situation like this when it is only a situation. You don't wait for it to become a problem. So right now you're dealing with the situation, so now is the time for you to put forth your efforts.